Hello, I'm Anna George and I'm an author. Tipping is my third book. It's a departure for me. My first two books were literary thrillers and dealing with dark subject matter like domestic abuse and impoverished children. Writing Tipping, I wanted to write about something lighter and more uplifting, so I decided to write about raising teenagers and marriage in midlife and gender equality. So Tipping is the story of an overwhelmed mother of three who reaches tipping point one day when her husband inadvertently locks her in the family car. This he does when they're on the way to meet the principal at her son's school because her son's been involved in a sexting scandal. And Liv realises after this morning that both her son and the school don't understand the ramifications of the sexting scandal and what it says about the school's values, because a lot of kids from the school were involved in it. And also her son's deeper understanding of this issue is just not there. So Liv goes on a campaign to make change at home. She asks everyone to write a list of what they do around the house, and she writes her own. Her list is 9 pages long with 322 items. Their lists are a page or a page and a half in very big font. So she realises we're completely out of whack with our values and we need to reset. So she delegates tasks. She asks her husband to have a look at the way he's constructed his life and his work life and his workplace. And she calls out the boys' school on the way it's responding to the Instagram account, and also to question how it's teaching its kids to interact around gender and equality and respect and consent. All these issues, which are hugely topical today, are in my book, which I've been writing for 4 years. The book was inspired by some school stories. I wanted to write a book about how to raise emotionally intelligent young men who respect women, and I wanted to write a book about gender equality and what we can do to shake up the lot of men and women in society. And I was looking around, for a story, and a couple of school stories came to mind. Some boys who did create a dodgy Instagram account at a local private school in Bayside, and then the community kind of split around how to deal with those boys. Some of the mums of the girls were very angry because it was a rate the girls' looks kind of Instagram account. The word slut was thrown around a fair bit. But some in the community were defensive of the boys. It's just a joke, you're taking it too seriously. I think one of the mums wrote about it on a Facebook page on the neighbourhood hub. She got trolled there for what she wrote. She got a lot of support, but she also got trolled, and she also had some, I think, old boy call her up and really tell her to pull her head in, which I thought was outrageous but fascinating. So I wanted to use that as a springboard into my story. And also, well-known uprising, if you like, at another private school in Melbourne when a deputy head cut the boy's hair because it didn't comply with the uniform code, which led to him losing his job briefly, but a lot of activism at the school to get that man's job back. So I was very interested in the power of the kids to become activists and to boycott classes and rally the school for change, and how that can happen. And now we're seeing that happen today in Melbourne. But those stories inspired Tipping because I wanted to look at the power of tweaks to make real change, and the power of tweaks to become tipping points, like that man and his haircut led to real change at that school because his job was returned to him after the boys' activism. And then a couple of months later, the relatively newer principal left because that haircut brought to bear in a more public way all the issues at the school. There was a lot of conflict at the school with the old guard and the new guard, and the haircut brought all that to light, and the relatively newer principal left, and the old, more established, very beloved vice principal was given his job back. So I was fascinated by all of that. I'm really passionate about the possibility of change in the gender equality space brought about by changes to environment. So I did some research and found this field called Behavioural Design. Who knew? Obviously it's a thing, and psychologists know about it, behavioural economists know about it, but as a layperson, as a writer, I didn't. And the kind of fundamental premise of that, which I've learned, is that people are acutely attuned to changes in their environment. So you change a physical environment and you can change people's behaviour on a wholesale level without needing to de-bias their minds. Because we all run on a lot of unconscious biases. They inform what we do, and sometimes we make mistakes because of our unconscious biases. And if we change environments, we can kind of counteract against and work against those biases and shift behaviour in a certain way. A classic example is in the US, they did a bit of a study on the effect of the environment on gun crime. So in certain regions or towns, suburbs, they did some work on all the abandoned lots and the abandoned houses, and they put gardens there instead, and they fixed up the abandoned houses and they made them more appealing environments, and the behaviour of the people in those spaces changed. Gun crime in those neighbourhoods went down because the gun crime wasn't sort of welcome in this more beautiful, habitable space. So just unconsciously we see an environment and we respond to what is expected in that environment. So this sort of stuff can be brought to bear in the school context. There's been a lot of research around the impact of role models on young girls and women, and what you see on the walls makes a big difference. A portrait, if you walk into a room full of portraits of men, you're not going to feel like you're going to ascend in this environment if you're in a boardroom. If you walk into a school and all you see are portraits of the old principals, the deputy principals, and it's predominantly all male, it sends a very clear message about the role of women in that environment. So you can change environments very simply. It's not hard to replace the portraits or mix up the images. Images in a science lab have been seen to be powerful, and images of Star Trek and Star Wars, take them down, put nature, put gender neutral images up, strengthens the link in the minds of girls as to the link between women and careers in STEM. Okay, so you make these subtle changes in an environment and it can change how people behave towards each other. So I'm fascinated by that, and it's so inspiring and hopeful that we can make real change in this gender equality space. So one was called What Came Before, which was a literary thriller framed around a husband strangling his wife, and it was about how can you find yourself in a relationship with a man who's abusive, and often you find that when it's a bit late. The other one was The Lone Child, which was about a new mum struggling with her new mum status, being a single mum too, and seeing a little child who looks to be neglected in her garden and wondering, how am I meant to help, what do I do? So quite different, very different tonally, but very much concerned with social justice and women's issues too, I guess. I really enjoyed writing with humour. I made a conscious choice to bring that into my writing because when I give talks, I try to make them funny. Humour is a big part of my marriage and my friendships, and so I wanted to sort of have the whole of me on the page instead of just one part. So it wasn't actually hard. If anything, I got quite carried away because this book's much longer than my other books. It was a lot of fun to write, and I really enjoyed some of the sections of the book. Look, I write because it brings me joy. I've always wanted to write. I think the writer's life can be a bit fraught, but I write because a day spent writing felt and feels like a day well spent in my life. Writing in 2020 didn't happen a whole lot. Luckily, my book was in the editing stage. Our 2 lockdowns in Melbourne just decimated my writing and my reading. The first lockdown was hideous. I've got 2 school-age sons and one of them needed a lot of attention to get through that first lockdown. So I wasn't writing. It was impossible to do 2 things at the same time. But the editing process was underway, and luckily my book kind of came back in between lockdowns and then went again. And in the second lockdown, I just let him go a bit more and got on with what I needed to do, which was more of the editing. Well, it is what I do. Yeah, so I've got my 2 sons, but look, I should be honest and say I'm very lucky, like a lot of writers, to be supported in part by my partner. So I've written and studied writing part-time or worked part-time for about 25 years. So the working part-time doesn't happen anymore, but and the writing, it's the whole range of the writing life, is giving talks, running workshops, and writing as well. Yeah. Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, I loved. I thought it was brilliant, funny, wise, poignant, humane, and very fresh. Yeah, stories that I hadn't read before. All those women were fascinating. I loved Nancy Drew. I read a lot of Nancy Drew, and then all the Agatha Christie. I had millions of Agatha Christies. I just loved the mystery and the crime. And I think for a long time I thought my writing had to have a dead body in the first couple of pages in order for it to be a workable book. It took me a while to get rid of the dead bodies. A new book, but it's really, really early days. I can say I think that I want to stay in this fun, playful space where I tackle serious topics and meaty topics, things that I think are really important and worth thinking about and talking about. And so being a part of a conversation that I think is necessary, but in a playful and light way. That's okay. It was a little bit like going to the dentist and a little bit fun at the same time.